I am Nia. I am 35 years old. At my husband's prestigious company gala, he dragged me behind a marble pillar, his fingers digging into my arm. "Do not open your mouth and do not embarrass me tonight," he hissed. I quietly stepped aside and smoothed my dress. I said nothing. But later that evening, the billionaire chairman of the company walked right past. My husband took my hand and told the entire room he had spent 18 years searching for me. Before I share exactly how this night unfolded, let me know what city you are watching from in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever let someone underestimate you right before you proved them wrong. The crystal chandeliers of the Ritz Carlton cast a golden glow across the grand ballroom, illuminating the absolute elite of the Atlanta financial sector. Waiters carried silver trays filled with expensive champagne, and the loud hum of strategic networking echoed off the vaulted ceilings. It was the annual gala for Sterling Holdings, a night where careers were made or destroyed in the span of a single conversation. But I was not allowed to be part of it. The heavy footsteps of my husband Marcus struck the polished marble floor with aggressive, rapid thuds. I followed right behind him not by choice, but because his hand was clamped around my forearm like an iron vise. He pulled me forcefully away from the grand entrance, steering me past the lavish ice sculptures and into a dim, secluded corner near the back bar, where the lighting was poor and the music was muffled. He finally released his grip, leaving a dull, throbbing ache radiating down my wrist. Marcus leaned in close, trapping me against the heavy velvet drapes. I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath and the raw desperation sweating through his tailored suit. He pointed a rigid finger directly at my face. "Desmond Sterling is arriving in 20 minutes, he whispered, his voice vibrating with a cold, controlled fury. "The chairman is going to be evaluating the executive team tonight, and I am not letting you ruin my shot at a promotion. Do you understand me? You stay right here in this corner. Do not try to mingle with the partners. Do not try to talk about financial data with anyone. And whatever you do, do not embarrass me in front of the board." I stood perfectly still. My face remained a blank, unreadable mask. I did not cry. I did not argue. I did not even flinch. I simply looked down and used both hands to carefully smooth the deep wrinkles his aggressive grip had left on the fabric of my dress. This was the man I had married. A mid-level manager at an investment firm who was so consumed by the desperate need to climb the corporate ladder that he viewed his own wife as a heavy liability. Marcus adjusted his silk tie, his chest puffing out as he checked his reflection in the mirrored wall behind the bar. He had spent the last 3 weeks obsessing over this single night. He bought that custom tuxedo on credit, determined to look like he belonged to a class of generational wealth he had never actually earned. To him, I was just an accessory that did not quite match his grand aspirations. A financial data analyst who preferred building complex mathematical algorithms in the quiet of a home office over schmoozing at elite country clubs. In his arrogant eyes, my quiet nature was a severe defect. My lack of desire to wear flashy designer labels and play the role of the subservient corporate wife was a direct insult to his carefully crafted image. "Just stand by the bar and drink your water," Marcus ordered, his eyes darting anxiously toward the main ballroom to see if anyone important had noticed our sudden departure. "If anyone asks, you are just taking a break from your heels. Let me handle the talking tonight. I need them to focus on my leadership, not your lack of social grace." I watched him physically transform as he prepared to step back into the bright light of the party. His rigid, angry shoulders suddenly relaxed into an easy, confident posture. The cruel, hard sneer on his face morphed instantly into a charismatic, winning smile. It was an absolute masterclass in deception. He was getting ready to go back out there and play the role of the brilliant, innovative financial mind. He was ready to confidently sell the board members the risk prediction algorithm he claimed to have developed entirely by himself. He had no idea that I knew exactly what he had done with my hard work. He had no idea I knew about the late nights he spent copying my code. And he certainly had no idea that my silence right now was not submission. It was pure strategy. I nodded once, my voice perfectly level and calm. "Do not worry about me, Marcus. I will not get in your way. I will stay right here in the shadows until the time is right." He did not catch the double meaning. He was too blinded by his own ambition. He just grunted in approval, gave his suit jacket one final tug, and walked away, disappearing into the sea of wealthy executives in glittering gowns. Left entirely alone in the dim corner, I reached into the small inner pocket of my evening clutch. My fingers brushed against the smooth, cold metal of a tiny flash drive. The ballroom music swelled, and the clinking of crystal glasses grew louder as the crowd eagerly anticipated the arrival of the billionaire chairman. I took a slow, steady breath. Marcus wanted me to be invisible. He wanted me to be small. But standing there in the dark, watching him shake hands and tell lies to powerful people, I knew the power dynamic was already shifting. He thought he was banishing me to the corner to protect his fragile ego. He did not realize he was just giving me the perfect vantage point to watch his entire world collapse. The heavy scent of expensive cologne and designer perfume announced their arrival before they even stepped into the shadows. Two figures emerged from the glittering light of the main ballroom, their perfectly polished silhouettes cutting through the dimness of my secluded corner. It was my sister-in-law Chloe and her husband Bradley. Bradley possessed the kind of effortless, arrogant posture that only came from generations of unearned wealth. He was a white man born into old money, the heir to a massive shipping fortune, and he never let anyone in our family forget it. Chloe clung to his arm like it was a golden ticket, wearing a diamond necklace that cost more than my college tuition. She had spent her entire life desperately trying to distance herself from any hint of struggle, and marrying Bradley was her ultimate prize. She loved looking down on others to elevate her own status within the elite circles of Atlanta. "Well, look who Marcus tucked away in the dark," Bradley said, his voice dripping with mock surprise. He swirled the amber liquid in his crystal glass, looking me up and down with a deeply insulting smirk. "I honestly did not think he would bring you to an event like this, Nia. Sterling Holdings is a bit out of your usual demographic, is it not?" I kept my expression perfectly neutral. "I am just giving Marcus some space to network," I replied smoothly. Bradley chuckled, a short, patronizing sound. "Space, right. It is probably for the best. This level of corporate strategy can be a bit overwhelming for someone with your background. Public education in South Atlanta does not exactly prepare you for the nuances of high-level financial models. It is a steep learning curve from the projects to the penthouse. Just try to smile and nod if anyone important accidentally speaks to you. We do not need you trying to sound articulate and embarrassing, Marcus." The racial and classist undertones of his words were not accidental. They were deliberate, practiced insults designed to remind me that no matter how hard I worked, he would always view me as a poor girl from the wrong side of the tracks who somehow sneaked into his exclusive country club. Chloe did not defend me. She never did. Instead, she leaned into Bradley, feeding off his arrogance. She looked at my navy blue dress, her eyes narrowing in disgust. "Honestly, Nia," Chloe sighed, adjusting her silk shawl, "I told Marcus to give you my stylist's number. That dress looks like you picked it off a clearance rack at a discount outlet. Marcus is about to present a groundbreaking algorithm to Desmond Sterling himself. This is the biggest night of his career, and you look like you are here to serve the appetizers. You know how unforgiving this circle is to people who do not fit in. You are a representation of my brother, and frankly, you are dragging down his brand." They fed off each other, a toxic loop of superiority and entitlement. They believed their own hype so completely that they could not see the reality standing right in front of them. They had no idea that the groundbreaking algorithm Marcus was parading around the ballroom was written entirely by the woman they were currently treating like trash. "Since you are just standing here taking up space," Chloe continued, thrusting her empty champagne flute into my hand, "make yourself useful. The bartender in this corner is terribly slow, and I do not want to walk all the way to the main bar in these heels. Get me a dry martini, 3 olives, and get Bradley another scotch. Macallan 18 neat." She did not ask. She ordered. She spoke to me exactly the way she spoke to the service staff, waving her hand dismissively, as if I were nothing more than a minor convenience placed there to cater to her whims. Bradley smirked, checking the heavy gold Rolex on his wrist. "Do not look so confused, Nia. Getting drinks is just basic logistics. Even a low-level data entry clerk can follow simple instructions. Just try not to spill anything on the guests on your way back. We really do not want anyone important thinking Marcus married the help." My fingers tightened around the stem of the empty champagne flute. I looked at Bradley's arrogant smile. I looked at Chloe's disdainful glare. I looked down at the gleaming Rolex watch on Bradley's wrist, the very watch Marcus had gifted him last month. Marcus had claimed it was a token of brotherhood. I knew it was bought using funds secretly siphoned from my personal business accounts to buy Bradley's approval. They thought they were crushing my spirit. They thought they were putting me in my place. But every insulting word out of their mouths only hardened my resolve. I did not raise my voice. I did not throw the glass. I simply looked Bradley directly in the eye, my face a mask of absolute chilling calm. "I will get your drinks right away," I said quietly. "Good girl," Bradley sneered, turning his back to me and guiding Chloe back toward the bright lights and the loud music. "Try to be quick about it." I watched them walk away, their laughter echoing off the marble pillars. They felt so powerful, so invincible. But as I turned toward the main bar, my thumb brushed against the hidden flash drive in my pocket. Let them have their drinks. Let them have their jokes. Because in just a few minutes, that arrogant smile was going to be wiped off Bradley's face permanently, and Chloe was going to watch the false empire she worshipped burn to the ground. I did not walk toward the bar. Instead, I stood my ground and let my eyes drop from Bradley's arrogant sneer down to the heavy gold Rolex on his wrist. I did not shed a single tear. There was no lump in my throat and no trembling in my hands. A lifetime of being pushed down by this family had burned away my capacity to cry for them. "Before I fetch your drinks," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady pitch that stopped them dead in their tracks. "I just want to clarify one thing. Chloe is right about my dress. I did buy it on sale, but I paid for it using money I actually earned through my own hard work." Bradley turned back around, his smug smile faltering slightly. His eyes narrowed. "What is that supposed to mean?" I stepped half a pace closer, forcing him to look me directly in the eye. "It means I do not need to finance my lifestyle using my mother-in-law's corporate credit card, Bradley. I know exactly how you paid for your luxury golf club membership last month. I also know that custom suit you are wearing is currently charging interest on a Sterling Holdings expense account that does not even belong to you. So before you lecture me about the nuances of high-level finance and public education, you might want to learn how to pay your own bills first." Chloe gasped loudly, her hand flying to her diamond necklace. "How dare you speak to my husband like that? You are nothing but a disgrace to this family." Before Chloe could finish her insult, a harsh hand clamped down on my shoulder. It was Marcus. He had seen the exchange from the edge of the ballroom and rushed over, his face flushed with absolute rage. He yanked me roughly backward, shielding Bradley and Chloe with his own body, as if I were a dangerous threat. "What is wrong with you?" Marcus hissed through clenched teeth, his grip bruising my collarbone. "I told you to keep your mouth shut. Bradley, I am so sorry. She does not know what she is talking about. She had too much champagne before we arrived, and she is just jealous." Bradley adjusted his jacket, his face red with a mixture of intense embarrassment and fury. "You need to get your wife under control, Marcus. She is a massive liability. If she talks like this to the wrong person tonight, your career is entirely over. Come on, Chloe, we are leaving this dark corner. It smells like desperation." Marcus waited until his sister and brother-in-law marched away before turning his full wrath back on me. He shoved me deeper into the shadows behind the marble pillar until my back hit the cold stone. His chest heaved as he pointed a shaking finger an inch from my nose. "Are you actively trying to destroy my life?" Marcus growled, his eyes wide with panic. "I bring you to the most important event of the decade, and you insult the only family members who actually tolerate you. You are going to stand right here in the dark. You are not going to speak to anyone. You are not going to look at anyone. If you ruin this promotion for me, I swear you will regret it. Do you understand me, Nia?" I looked at the veins popping in his neck. I looked at the sheer panic and desperation radiating from every pore of his body. He was so terrified of losing his carefully constructed image that he was willing to crush his own wife into the dirt just to keep up appearances. He wanted to break me to ensure his own fragile ego remained intact. "I understand perfectly, Marcus. I replied, my tone eerily flat. I will not say another word to your family. I will step back into the shadows exactly as you wish. Marcus glared at me for one long second, trying to read my face. Finding only blank compliance, he finally exhaled a sharp breath. He turned on his heel and stormed back into the brightly lit ballroom, desperate to salvage his reputation. I watched him smooth his hair plaster on his fake, charismatic smile and blend right back into the crowd of wealthy executives like a chameleon. I stepped backward into the absolute darkest corner of the room, letting the heavy velvet drapes conceal me completely. The pulsing bass of the ballroom music vibrated through the floorboards, but my mind was completely silent. I slipped my hand back into the pocket of my evening clutch. My fingers wrapped tightly around the small metal flash drive. The cool, sharp edges of the USB pressed hard into my palm, grounding me. Marcus thought he had silenced me. He thought he had won. But as I stood there, gripping the device that held the absolute destruction of his entire career and his family's false wealth, I knew the truth. This temporary silence was not a defeat. It was simply the quiet pullback of a slingshot right before the stone is released. The petty insults were over. The real game was about to begin. The cold metal of the flash drive in my hand brought my mind back to exactly how we reached this breaking point. The foundation of Marcus's impending destruction was not laid tonight in this glittering ballroom. It was cemented exactly 48 hours ago, around the suffocating mahogany dining table at my mother-in-law's house. The heavy scent of roasted turkey, candied yams, and cinnamon filled the air, but the atmosphere in Beatrice's formal dining room was entirely devoid of warmth. Beatrice sat at the head of the long table, like a monarch holding court. The room was a monument to her desperate need for high social status. The silver cutlery was polished to a blinding shine, and the crystal glasses reflected the harsh light of the chandelier above. Every detail was meticulously curated to project an image of generational wealth that the family did not actually possess. Beatrice sliced the turkey with theatrical precision. She placed the thickest, most succulent cuts of white meat directly onto Marcus's gold-rimmed plate. She heaped large spoonfuls of cornbread dressing and macaroni and cheese in front of him, cooing over how absolutely exhausted her boy looked. She then passed the serving platters down the line to Chloe and Bradley, ensuring their plates were equally piled high with the best the meal had to offer. By the time the heavy ceramic bowls reached my side of the table, they were picked over. I quietly took a small portion of green beans and a dry dinner roll. Beatrice did not offer to pass the gravy. She did not ask if I wanted a different cut of meat. She completely looked past me, as if I were simply an empty chair. "I want to make a toast to the man of the hour," Beatrice announced, raising her wine glass and tapping it with a silver fork to command the room's attention. Her chest swelled with pride as she gazed adoringly at her son. "To Marcus. Tomorrow he submits his risk prediction algorithm to the executive board. This is not just a work project. This is the master key that will finally unlock the door to the absolute top tier of Atlanta society for our family." Marcus leaned back in his chair, swirling his red wine with a falsely modest smile. "It has been a grueling few months," he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck, as if he carried the weight of the entire financial world on his shoulders. The non-linear logic models were incredibly complex to map out. Cracking the predictive code took everything I had. But I am confident. When Chairman Sterling sees the massive profit margins this algorithm can protect, the vice president seat is guaranteed. I stared down at my plate, my hands gripping my napkin under the table. The sheer, unadulterated audacity of his lie made the air in my lungs burn. He had not cracked any predictive code. He did not even understand the basic mathematical architecture of the non-linear models he was currently bragging about. For the past 4 months, I was the one sitting awake at the kitchen island at 3 in the morning. I was the one running the relentless simulations, debugging the dense data scripts, and building the entire neural network from scratch. I poured my years of expertise into that algorithm, while he slept comfortably in our bed. He was claiming my sleepless nights, my intellect, and my proprietary code as his own personal triumph. This algorithm will change everything for us, Beatrice continued, completely blind to the reality of her son's profound incompetence. We are stepping out of the upper middle class and stepping into the rooms where real legacy wealth is made. Desmond Sterling himself will finally recognize the undeniable genius in this family. She took a long sip of her wine, her eyes gleaming with the fantasy of her impending social elevation. Then she turned her sharp, judgmental gaze toward me. Her warm maternal smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer condescension. "I hope you understand the gravity of this weekend, Nia," Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a cold, instructional tone. "Marcus is carrying the entire future of this family on his back right now. The absolute least you can do is ensure his suits are properly pressed and his meals are ready, so he can focus his energy on his brilliant work. Behind every great man is a woman who knows how to stay out of his way and manage the background logistics. You need to step up and support him better, instead of wasting time on your own little data entry tasks at the office." Chloe chimed in from across the table, picking at her salad. "Honestly, Mom is right. Marcus is about to be sitting at the right hand of Desmond Sterling. He needs a wife who understands how to elevate his brand, not someone who drags him down with a poverty mindset. You should be taking notes on how a real executive operates." I looked at the people sitting around this beautifully decorated table. They were gorging themselves on a feast of their own delusions. They honestly believed Marcus was a prodigy. They honestly believed that treating me like an uneducated servant would somehow elevate their own status. They looked at my quiet demeanor and mistook it for stupidity. They looked at my humble background in South Atlanta and assumed I possessed no value beyond what I could do for them domestically. I slowly placed my fork down on the table. The urge to scream the truth, to flip the table, and expose Marcus right then and there was a raging fire in my chest. I wanted to look Beatrice in the eye and tell her that the undeniable genius she was celebrating was actually sitting quietly at the end of her table, eating the scraps she had discarded. But I forced the fire down. I swallowed the bitter taste of their disrespect. I knew that screaming at a Thanksgiving dinner would only result in me being labeled as angry and jealous. It would give them exactly the reaction they wanted. So I stayed silent. I let Marcus soak in the unearned praise. I let Beatrice plan her imaginary country club parties. I let them build their glorious castle in the sky, fully aware that I was the one holding the explosive charge at the foundation. Later that evening, the oppressive Thanksgiving dinner finally concluded. The plates were cleared, the false pleasantries were exhausted, and Marcus retreated to the mahogany-paneled study to review his presentation one last time. I entered the room carrying a tray of coffee, setting it down quietly on the edge of his massive desk. He was staring intensely at the glowing screen of his laptop, his brow furrowed in a deep scowl as he scrolled through pages of complex data structures. I glanced over his shoulder. He had the core execution module open on the screen. I saw immediately what he had done. In his desperate attempt to tweak the formatting and make the code look like his own original work, he had altered the sequencing parameters. He changed the risk weighting variables to a static metric, completely breaking the dynamic feedback loop I had spent 3 weeks perfecting. I pointed a finger at the center of his screen. "You changed the data ingestion parameters on line 400. If you run the simulation with a static variable there, the entire predictive model will crash during the live stress test. It creates an infinite loop in the volatility index." Marcus slammed his hand down on the heavy wooden desk with a violent crack. The coffee cups rattled harshly against the silver tray. He spun his leather chair around, fixing me with a glare of pure, unadulterated contempt. "What do you know about core algorithms?" he sneered, his voice dripping with absolute condescension. "You are a low-level data analyst. Your job is to clean spreadsheets and format simple graphs. You do not understand the complex financial architecture required for a project of this magnitude. Do not come into my office and try to correct my work just because you read a few coding blogs online." My jaw tightened. The sheer audacity of his statement was breathtaking. "Your work," I repeated, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady. "That is my code, Marcus. Every single line, every recursive function, every neural pathway in that architecture was built by my hands. You did not even know what a nonlinear predictive model was until I spent a month breaking it down for you on our living room whiteboard. I leaned over the desk, invading his space, refusing to back down. I checked the project directory on the company server this morning. You wiped my credentials from the repository. You bypassed the version control protocols and submitted the entire package under your sole developer identification. You erased my name from the title page of a project I built from the ground up. Marcus scoffed, leaning back in his chair with a sickeningly arrogant smile. He crossed his arms over his chest, looking at me like I was a petulant child, throwing a tantrum over a toy. I did not erase you, Nia. I streamlined the reporting structure. I am the project manager. I am the director overseeing the departmental output. You are just a subordinate executing tasks under my direction. When a construction worker hammers a nail into a wall, they do not get their name on the deed to the skyscraper. The architect does. I am the architect here. I gave you the vision and you just typed it out. I stared at him, marveling at the depths of his delusion. You did not give me a vision, Marcus. You gave me a blank sheet of paper and a panic attack because you promised the board a revolutionary product you had absolutely no idea how to deliver. You begged me to save your job. You pleaded with me to work nights and weekends because you were drowning in expectations you could not meet. He stood up abruptly, towering over me, trying to use his physical stature to intimidate me into submission. Do not rewrite history to make yourself feel important, he growled, stepping closer. You are my wife. Your job is to support my career. My success is your success. If I get this vice president promotion, you benefit directly. You get the bigger house. You get the better lifestyle. You should be thanking me for taking this project to the executive level, because nobody in that boardroom is going to take a pitch seriously if it comes from a low-level desk worker with no pedigree. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a harsh, venomous whisper. Let us be brutally honest for a second. Desmond Sterling is looking for visionary leaders. He is looking for executives who understand high society and global markets. He is not looking for a girl from South Atlanta who thinks she is a genius because she knows how to write a few Python scripts. I am the face of this operation. I am the one with the polish, the connections, and the pedigree to sell this to the billionaires. You are just the background noise. Accept your place. The sheer cruelty of his words struck the air between us, but it did not wound me. It simply solidified my resolve. He honestly believed I was nothing without him. He honestly believed his stolen title and fake confidence could outperform my actual intellect. He looked at me and saw someone he could exploit and discard at his own convenience. I looked past his angry face and focused on the flawed code blinking on his laptop screen. If he ran that specific sequence tomorrow in front of the executive board, it would crash spectacularly. It would humiliate him in front of the very people he was so desperate to impress. But I was not going to tell him how to fix it. I was not going to step in and save him this time. I was done being the invisible safety net for a man who despised my roots and stole my brilliance. I stepped back from the desk, smoothing my expression into a mask of total chilling indifference. You are absolutely right, Marcus, I said softly. You are the architect. You are the face of this operation. You should present it exactly as you have it written right there. I am sure Chairman Sterling will be incredibly interested to see exactly how your brilliant mind works. I turned on my heel and walked out of the study without looking back. I left him alone in that room with his stolen files and his inflated ego. He thought he had successfully put me in my place. He thought he had won the argument by asserting his false superiority. He had no idea he was holding a ticking time bomb of a broken algorithm, and I was just handing him the rope he would soon use to hang himself. I walked down the long, carpeted hallway of Beatrice's sprawling house, moving steadily toward the guest bedroom. My heart beat a slow, methodical rhythm against my ribs. I had just handed him the rope, but Marcus was not satisfied with my silent departure. My absolute refusal to argue, to beg, or to cry had fractured his fragile ego. He needed to see me shatter to validate his own false sense of superiority. The heavy wooden door to the guest bedroom burst open before I could even reach my suitcase. Marcus stormed in, slamming the door shut behind him with enough force to rattle the picture frames on the walls. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, his face twisted into an ugly mask of pure resentment. Do not ever turn your back on me when I am speaking to you, he hissed, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. You think walking away makes you powerful, Nia? You think sitting in silence makes you my equal? Let me remind you exactly who you are and where you came from before I saved you. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, forcing me to look up at him. The polished corporate executive was entirely gone, replaced by a bitter, insecure man desperate to crush the woman he knew was smarter than him. You are a black orphan girl from the absolute worst slums of South Atlanta. Marcus spat the words, hitting the air like venom. You grew up wearing donated clothes and eating out of community food pantries. You did not have a legacy. You did not have a pedigree. You had absolutely nothing until I gave you my last name. Do you honestly think anyone in the financial district would give a damn about a single line of code you wrote if it did not have my signature on it? Without my title, without the respectability of my family name, who would ever read a report from a girl like you? They would take one look at your background, your zip code, and your lack of connections, and they would throw your resume straight into the trash. I elevated you. I brought you into high society. I made you relevant. The sheer brutality of his words struck a visceral chord deep inside my chest. He was not just insulting my career anymore. He was weaponizing my deepest traumas. He was taking the tragic death of my parents, the years I spent bouncing around the foster care system, the countless nights I spent shivering in a drafty apartment, while teaching myself complex mathematics on a broken library computer, and he was using it all to strip away my humanity. He was trying to take my greatest triumphs, my survival and my brilliance, and reduce them to an act of charity that he had supposedly provided. For a fraction of a second, the old insecurities flared up. The heavy crushing weight of the imposter syndrome that society constantly forces onto women who look like me threatened to pull me under. He wanted me to believe that I was an imposter in his world of wealth and privilege. He wanted me to believe that my intellect was worthless without his validation. But as I stared into his eyes, I saw nothing but fear. He was not shouting because he was strong. He was shouting because he was utterly terrified. He knew he was a fraud. He knew he could not survive the executive board presentation without the code I had written. His entire arrogant speech was nothing more than a desperate, pathetic attempt to convince himself that he was the master of a universe he did not actually understand. The brief flare of pain in my chest instantly turned into a glacier of pure, cold resolve. I did not yell back. I did not defend my upbringing. I simply turned away from him and walked calmly toward the large mahogany armoire in the corner of the room. I unzipped the heavy canvas garment bag hanging inside. I carefully pulled out the custom-tailored tuxedo he had purchased for the Sterling Holdings gala. The fabric was pristine, the silk lapels catching the dim light of the bedroom. I laid the jacket gently on the bed, running my hands over the shoulders to smooth out any invisible creases. I checked the silver cufflinks, ensuring they were perfectly polished. "What are you doing?" Marcus demanded, his voice faltering, slightly confused by my complete lack of emotional reaction. "I am packing your suit for the gala tomorrow night," I replied, my voice completely devoid of any inflection. I picked up his silk tie and folded it with meticulous precision. "You are absolutely right, Marcus. I am from South Atlanta. I did not grow up with a silver spoon or a trust fund or a legacy family name to protect me when I made mistakes." I turned to face him, holding the perfectly folded tie. I stepped into his personal space, mirroring the intimidation tactic he had just tried to use on me. But unlike him, I was not shaking. I was perfectly still. "You are the face of this operation," I said softly, placing the tie against his chest and patting it down with a chillingly gentle touch. "You have the pedigree. You have the name. You have the respectability to stand in front of Desmond Sterling and claim that algorithm as your own masterpiece. So you need to look your absolute best when you do it. Make sure you wear this specific tie. The board appreciates a man who pays attention to the finest details." Marcus stared at me, his chest heaving. He searched my eyes for any sign of sarcasm or rebellion, but I offered him nothing but the image of a submissive, supportive wife. He slowly exhaled a breath of arrogant satisfaction. His shoulders dropped, the panic receding from his face as his delusional ego took over once again. He truly believed he had broken me. He believed his vicious insults about my past had successfully bullied me back into my place. "Just make sure the rest of my bags are packed and put in the trunk by morning," he ordered, his voice regaining its usual haughty edge. "And do not forget my leather dress shoes." He turned around and walked out of the guest bedroom, his head held high, fully convinced of his own supremacy. The door clicked shut, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence of the room. I turned back to the bed and looked down at the expensive tuxedo. A slow, dark smile spread across my face. Marcus thought my background made me weak. He thought growing up in the harsh reality of South Atlanta was a stain on my character. He completely failed to realize that surviving the bottom of the world teaches you exactly how to dismantle the people at the top. He was going to put on that expensive suit. He was going to stand in front of the most powerful billionaires in the city. He was going to confidently run the predictive model exactly as he had stolen it. And because he had arrogantly dismissed my warning about the static variable online 400, he was going to trigger a catastrophic system failure live on screen. I carefully zipped the garment bag shut, locking his fate inside. The trap was set, the bait was taken. All I had to do now was put on my discount dress, stand quietly in the shadows of the Ritz Carlton ballroom, and watch the man who just called me a worthless orphan completely destroy his own life. The memory of zipping that garment bag dissolved as the harsh clinking of crystal glasses brought me sharply back to the present. The 48 hours between that suffocating guest bedroom and this glittering ballroom had been a masterclass in silent endurance. I had played my part perfectly. I had ironed his shirts. I had packed his briefcase. I had handed him the exact laptop that held the corrupted algorithm. During the black car ride to the Ritz Carlton earlier this evening, Marcus had spent the entire 45-minute trip rehearsing his pitch. He stared at his reflection in the tinted window, practicing his hand gestures and adjusting his posture. He recited the technical terms I had taught him, throwing around phrases like predictive volatility and risk mitigation protocols with the smooth, empty cadence of a car salesman. He memorized the vocabulary, but he lacked the fundamental comprehension to back it up. He did not know how the engine worked. He only knew how to turn the key. And because he was too arrogant to verify the mechanics, he had no idea the engine was rigged to blow. I sat next to him in the back seat, watching the Atlanta city lights blur past the window. He did not ask me how I was doing. He did not thank me for my help. He treated me like a ghost haunting his peripheral vision. His only concern was ensuring his tie was straight, and his stolen presentation was loaded onto the main screen in the ballroom. Now standing in the dark corner where he and his pretentious family had banished me, I watched the final act of his delusion unfold. I peeked through the heavy velvet drapes, keeping my body completely concealed in the shadows. Out in the center of the grand hall, Marcus had gathered a crowd of senior executives. The ambient lighting had dimmed slightly, drawing everyone's attention to a massive interactive display screen brought in specifically for tonight's technological showcases. Marcus stood beside it, radiating an unearned, sickening level of confidence. He had a wireless presenter remote in his hand, wielding it like a magic wand. Bradley and Chloe stood in the front row of his audience, holding their champagne flutes like trophies. They were nodding along enthusiastically, acting as his personal cheerleaders, to signal to the other executives that Marcus belonged to their elite inner circle. "Gentlemen?" Marcus projected his voice over the low hum of the ballroom, ensuring his tone was rich with absolute authority. For the past 6 months, Sterling Holdings has relied on reactive data. We wait for the market to shift, and then we scramble to adjust our portfolios. But what if we could anticipate the impact of global supply chain disruptions before they even register on the international exchange? What if we could eliminate the guesswork? A few of the older silver-haired partners nodded in approval. They liked the pitch. It was aggressive. It was profitable. It was exactly what Desmond Sterling wanted to hear. Marcus was reeling them in with the polished charisma he had spent his entire life perfecting. "I have developed a proprietary nonlinear risk prediction model." Marcus continued, pressing the button on his remote. The massive screen behind him flickered to life, displaying a sleek, highly stylized dashboard that I had designed from scratch. It utilizes a dynamic neural network to process real-time market fluctuations. It isolates high-risk variables and neutralizes them within microseconds. From my hidden vantage point, my pulse remained entirely steady. He was delivering the lines flawlessly. He looked like a genius. He looked like the future vice president of Sterling Holdings. But I knew the absolute truth. I knew that beneath that beautiful polished dashboard, the core code was completely hollowed out. "Let me demonstrate a live stress test," Marcus announced, flashing a brilliant winning smile to the crowd. "We will simulate a sudden 30% drop in overseas tech manufacturing and watch how the algorithm instantaneously reallocates our digital assets to secure domestic bonds." He turned toward the screen. He raised the remote. He pressed the execute button. I did not blink. I did not breathe. I just watched. The screen flashed brilliantly for one fraction of a second. The loading bar shot across the bottom of the display, simulating the massive intake of data. Marcus turned back to his audience, opening his mouth to deliver his triumphant closing statement. But the words never came out. A loud, harsh electronic buzzing sound suddenly ripped through the elegant ballroom, entirely cutting off the soft, classical music playing in the background. The massive digital display behind Marcus abruptly turned violently red. The sleek dashboard completely vanished, replaced by an aggressive cascade of raw, chaotic error codes spilling endlessly down the screen. The infinite loop had triggered. The static variable he had arrogantly forced into line 400 had collided with the live data stream, creating an unresolvable mathematical paradox. The system was eating itself alive right in front of the entire executive board. Marcus froze. The confident smile melted off his face, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. He mashed the button on his presenter remote again and again, desperately trying to stop the simulation, trying to reverse the catastrophic failure. But the remote was useless. The algorithm was locked in a death spiral. "What is happening with the interface?" Marcus, one of the senior partners, demanded, stepping forward with a deep frown. "The numbers are cascading into the negative. Are you showing us a total portfolio liquidation?" Marcus swallowed hard, sweat instantly breaking out across his forehead. His custom tuxedo suddenly looked suffocatingly tight. "It is just a minor glitch in the visual display interface," he stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "The core logic is perfectly sound. I just need to refresh the graphic output." He practically threw the remote onto a nearby cocktail table and lunged for the keyboard connected to the display. His fingers flew across the keys, frantically typing commands he barely understood, trying to force the program to restart. But the red error screen remained locked, glaring down at him like a giant, merciless stop sign. Bradley leaned in his smug demeanor, faltering. "Fix it, Marcus," he hissed under his breath. "People are staring. You are making us look completely incompetent." "I cannot get it to reboot," Marcus whispered back, raw terror lacing his words. "The ingestion parameters are completely frozen. It is rejecting the override commands." He was drowning. He was standing in the middle of his own personal Titanic, and he had absolutely no idea how to patch the hole in the hull. He had insulted my public education. He had mocked my background. He had proudly claimed to be the architect of a masterpiece. And now the architect was standing helplessly while his stolen building collapsed around him. I stood in the darkness, a cool, satisfied smile finally touching my lips. The trap had sprung with absolute perfection. But the humiliation of a broken presentation was only the beginning. The real devastation was about to walk through the front doors. A sudden hush rippled through the back of the ballroom, swiftly spreading forward like a wave of cold air. The conversations died out. The clinking of glasses stopped. The crowd parted respectfully, creating a wide, clear path down the center of the room. Desmond Sterling had arrived. The billionaire chairman walked with the quiet, terrifying authority of a man who owned everything his eyes touched. He was flanked by his personal security detail, but he needed no introduction. He moved directly toward the digital display, his sharp, calculating gaze fixed firmly on the glaring red error screen and the sweating, panicked man standing beneath it. Marcus turned around, his face draining of all remaining color, as he found himself face to face with the most powerful man in the city. The moment of absolute reckoning had finally come. The grand ballroom of the Ritz Carlton was a theater, and Marcus was putting on the performance of his life. He stood dead center in the most exclusive networking circle of the evening, perfectly illuminated by the crystal chandelier above. A dozen senior executives from Sterling Holdings and various partner firms had formed a tight, eager ring around him. He held a glass of expensive bourbon in his left hand, using his right hand to make grand sweeping gestures as he spoke. He was not just pitching a financial model, he was selling an entire persona. He projected the exact image of a brilliant, aggressive young executive ready to conquer the global market. He threw his shoulders back, puffing out his chest inside that custom tuxedo I had meticulously packed for him. His voice resonated with a deep, artificial baritone designed to command absolute authority. He laughed at the right moments, tilted his head with feigned humility when praised, and smoothly fired off complex financial terminology like he had invented the concepts himself. He spoke of predictive asset reallocation, dynamic algorithmic hedging, and quantum data processing. The words rolled off his tongue like a rehearsed script, completely divorced from any actual comprehension of their mathematical reality. Standing right beside him, acting as his personal hype man, was Bradley. Bradley used his status as a man born into legacy wealth to validate Marcus to the older, skeptical executives in the circle. Bradley clapped Marcus heavily on the shoulder, flashing his perfectly bleached teeth at the surrounding billionaires. "I am telling you, gentlemen," Bradley announced, his voice booming over the background jazz music. "Marcus has completely cracked the code on volatility management." When he first explained the core architecture of this algorithm to me over 18 holes at the country club last weekend, I was absolutely floored. It is a game changer. He is marrying traditional investment intuition with next-generation machine learning. My family's holding company is already looking into restructuring our portfolio based on his preliminary models. He is family, of course, but business is business, and this man is a genuine visionary. The older executives nodded in unison, thoroughly impressed by Bradley's enthusiastic endorsement. They clinked their glasses together, murmuring their approval. Marcus soaked it all in, his ego swelling to astronomical proportions. He offered a modest, self-deprecating smile that was so incredibly fake it made my stomach turn. "I cannot take all this credit," Marcus said smoothly, taking a slow sip of his bourbon. "True innovation is about recognizing market inefficiencies and having the courage to build solutions from the ground up. I just locked myself in my study for the last 6 months, analyzed the raw data, and refused to sleep until the neural network could accurately predict the market shifts. Hard work always yields results." From my place in the absolute darkest corner of the ballroom, I watched this sickening charade unfold. I stood completely still against the cold marble pillar, a silent phantom in a cheap navy dress. I held a glass of ice water in my hand, raising it slowly to my lips. My eyes locked onto Marcus. If this were a movie, the camera would be panning continuously right now. It would sweep across the brilliantly lit center of the room, capturing Marcus's triumphant, arrogant smile and the adoring faces of the executives. Then it would glide back into the freezing shadows, focusing tightly on my face. It would capture the absolute chilling stillness in my eyes. It would highlight the stark, undeniable contrast between his loud, desperate performance and my quiet, lethal certainty. I watched him accept another round of handshakes. He was stealing my sleepless nights. He was wearing my exhaustion like a badge of honor. He was taking the grueling, complex equations I had formulated on our kitchen island and feeding them to these men as his own intellectual triumphs. He was doing it with such effortless sociopathy that it was genuinely terrifying. He felt no guilt. He felt no remorse. In his mind, because I was his wife, my brilliance was simply his property to claim. A senior vice president from the risk management division stepped forward, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He looked at Marcus with a sharp, analytical gaze. "The predictive reallocation sounds phenomenal in theory," Marcus, the executive, said, his tone shifting into a serious, probing inquiry. "But I am curious about your neural network's handling of black swan events. How exactly did you structure the recursive loops to prevent the algorithm from dumping domestic bonds during a false positive trigger in the Asian markets?" The air in the circle grew slightly tense. It was a highly specific, highly technical question. It was exactly the kind of question a real architect would answer with passion and precision. I watched Marcus carefully. I saw the microscopic flinch in his jaw. I saw the way his fingers tightened around his bourbon glass, turning his knuckles white. For a fraction of a second, the confident facade cracked, revealing the panicked, empty fraud underneath. He had absolutely no idea what a recursive loop was. He did not know how the domestic bonds were shielded because he had not written the code. He was standing on a trapdoor, and someone had just asked him to explain the locking mechanism. But Marcus was a master manipulator. He quickly deployed the exact defense mechanism he always used when he was out of his depth. He pivoted to corporate jargon. "That is the exact beauty of the architecture," Marcus answered smoothly, forcing a relaxed chuckle as he gestured broadly with his empty hand. "The system is designed to be entirely agnostic to regional false positives. We do not just look at isolated triggers, we look at the holistic data landscape. The proprietary nature of the code means the system self-corrects before a dump protocol can even be initiated. It is all about the synergy between the data ingestion and the output parameters." It was an answer composed entirely of meaningless buzzwords. It addressed absolutely nothing about the mathematical structure the executive had asked for. It was a smokescreen designed to sound intelligent while providing zero actual information. Bradley immediately jumped in to provide cover fire, clapping the senior vice president on the arm. "Exactly. Why get bogged down in the microscopic coding details when the macro profit margins are this spectacular? We should be toasting to the future, not running an IT audit at a gala." The group of men laughed, the tension dissipating instantly. The senior executive nodded, satisfied by the distraction, and raised his glass. "To the future," he echoed. Marcus smiled, his chest heaving slightly as he exhaled a breath he had been holding. He had survived the question. He had successfully faked his way through another technical inquiry. His eyes darted around the room, burning with an intense, greedy hunger. He was practically vibrating with the anticipation of his impending promotion. He honestly believed he was invincible. He believed his charm, backed by Bradley's old money influence, was an impenetrable shield that would protect him from any real scrutiny. I took another slow sip of my ice water. My gaze never left his face. The camera would be resting firmly on me now, capturing the cold, predatory calculation in my expression. I was not angry anymore. Anger was an uncontrolled emotion, and I was in absolute control. I was watching a hollow, empty shell of a man inflate himself with stolen air. He was flying higher and higher, completely intoxicated by his own deception. I let him enjoy the applause. I let him bask in the admiration of the executives. I let him taste the absolute pinnacle of success. Because you cannot truly destroy a man who is already on the ground. You have to let him climb to the very highest peak, let him feel the warmth of the sun on his face, and let him believe he has conquered the world. Only then do you pull the ladder away. Only then does the fall actually break him. The intoxicating high of surviving that first question made Marcus reckless. He believed he had successfully charmed the room, mistaking their polite nods for genuine validation. He took another large gulp of his bourbon, the liquid courage fueling his arrogance. He stepped away from Bradley's protective shadow and actively engaged a new cluster of executives standing near the grand piano. He wanted more applause. He wanted to cement his status before Chairman Sterling even walked through the doors. But he chose the wrong target. Standing at the edge of this new circle was Elias Thorne. Elias was a legendary quantitative analyst, a man who had survived 4 market crashes not through sheer luck or networking, but through ruthless, cold mathematics. He was an older black man with a silver beard and a stare that could cut through reinforced steel. He did not care about Bradley's country club memberships or Marcus's tailored suit. He cared about numbers, and he despised frauds. Elias stepped forward, cutting through Marcus's rehearsed monologue about dynamic synergy. He did not raise his voice, but his tone demanded absolute silence. Marcus Elias began, his voice dry and precise. "I reviewed the preliminary data packet you circulated yesterday. You claim this model utilizes a non-linear feedback loop to adjust for macroeconomic anomalies." Marcus beamed, puffing out his chest. "Exactly, Elias. It is a revolutionary approach to holistic asset shielding." Elias did not smile back. He tilted his head slightly, then explained to me the exact mathematical bridge you use to prevent data overfitting. When your nonlinear logic encounters a historical black swan variable, how does the neural network distinguish between a genuine market collapse and a localized statistical outlier? Walk me through the equation. The camera would capture the exact millisecond Marcus's heart stopped. The confident, brilliant smile instantly froze into a rigid, painful grimace. This was not a question he could deflect with corporate buzzwords. This was a demand for the raw, underlying architecture of the code. From my hidden vantage point behind the velvet drapes, I watched the sweat instantly bead across Marcus's forehead. The ambient temperature in the ballroom was perfectly controlled, but Marcus was suddenly burning up. I knew the exact answer Elias was demanding. It involved a custom Bayesian smoothing algorithm I had coded over 3 grueling days, a mathematical bridge I had literally drawn out on a napkin, while Marcus was complaining about his fantasy football lineup. Marcus opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He swallowed audibly, his Adam's apple bobbing against the tight collar of his tuxedo. "Well," Elias Marcus stammered, his voice suddenly lacking its previous deep artificial baritone. "The beauty of the system is that the proprietary software handles the smoothing automatically. We designed it to be highly intuitive." Elias took one step closer, invading Marcus's personal space. The older analyst was relentless. "Software does not write itself, Marcus. You just told this entire room you locked yourself in your study for 6 months to build this from the ground up. So tell me how you built the bridge. Did you use a standard regression model, or did you write a custom heuristic algorithm?" Marcus was completely suffocated. His eyes darted wildly around the circle of executives searching for a lifeline. He looked at Bradley, but Bradley suddenly looked incredibly interested in his empty champagne glass. Bradley's old money influence could buy introductions, but it could not buy a functioning brain. In the face of undeniable intellectual scrutiny, Bradley's privilege was entirely useless. I employed a synergy of both. Marcus choked out his voice, trembling noticeably. The macro environment requires a fluid approach to dynamic heuristics. We let the machine learning dictate the parameter boundaries. A heavy, deafening silence fell over the circle. The older executives exchanged sharp, knowing glances. The camera would slowly pan across their faces, capturing the exact moment admiration turned into cold, harsh suspicion. They were not easily fooled. They recognized the empty, desperate rambling of a man drowning in his own incompetence. Elias Thorne did not break eye contact with Marcus. He simply lowered his voice, delivering a fatal blow wrapped in absolute professional courtesy. "A man who builds a skyscraper can tell you exactly where the load-bearing walls are placed. You, Marcus, are merely describing the color of the paint." The collective gasp in the room was almost silent, but the damage was astronomical. Marcus physically shrank. His shoulders slumped, and the expensive bourbon in his glass trembled as his hand shook uncontrollably. He tried to force a laugh, a pathetic high-pitched sound that echoed awkwardly in the quiet space. "I think we are getting a bit too lost in the weeds for a gala, Elias. I would be happy to have my technical team forward you the raw data logs on Monday." "You said you were the technical team," another executive muttered from the back of the group, his arms crossed over his chest. "You said you wrote it." Chloe rushed forward, grabbing Marcus's arm with a frantic, forced smile. "Oh, Marcus, darling, there you are. We need to go check on our table arrangements." "Excuse us, gentlemen." She practically dragged him away from the circle of scrutinizing billionaires. Bradley trailed closely behind them, his face flushed red with proxy embarrassment. I stepped slightly out of the shadows, watching them retreat toward the center of the hall like wounded animals. My chest swelled with a profound, icy satisfaction. They were suffocating in the very same elite society they had just weaponized against me. Marcus had spent our entire marriage trying to convince me that I was unworthy of his world, that my intellect was a cheap commodity he could casually steal and repackage. He truly believed his polished image and arrogant swagger were enough to conquer the financial district. He was learning the hard way that when you steal someone else's crown, you eventually have to prove you know how to rule. He had completely exposed himself. The rumor mill in the ballroom would start churning instantly. The whispers would spread from the bar to the dining tables. The executives would question his credibility, his project, and his entire career history. The Golden Boy image was not just fractured, it was shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. Marcus leaned heavily against a high cocktail table, pulling at his silk tie as if it were a noose. Chloe was whispering furiously into his ear, her face twisted in panic while Bradley scowled at the floor. They were completely surrounded by hundreds of the wealthiest people in Atlanta, yet they had never been more isolated. The false empire they had built on the foundation of my stolen brilliance was collapsing in real time, and the structural failure was a masterpiece to behold. I raised my glass of ice water in a silent, solitary toast. I did not need to scream or make a scene. I did not need to throw a fit in the middle of the Ritz Carlton to secure my vengeance. All I had to do was stand quietly in the dark and let the sheer weight of his own profound ignorance crush him to dust. But the absolute best part of the evening was still yet to come. The crushing humiliation Marcus had just endured from Elias Thorne was merely the opening act. The crowd suddenly parted again, the low whispers instantly silenced by a sudden intense shift in the atmosphere. The heavy wooden doors at the grand entrance swung wide open. The true architect of this financial universe had arrived, and he was about to permanently alter the trajectory of every single person standing in this room. The heavy oak doors of the grand ballroom swung open with a resounding thud that echoed across the vaulted ceiling. The low hum of anxious whispers and clinking crystal died instantly. The jazz quartet stopped playing mid-note. A profound, heavy silence crashed down on the Ritz Carlton. Desmond Sterling had crossed the threshold. He was a man who did not just occupy space, he commanded reality itself. At 60 years old, the billionaire chairman of Sterling Holdings possessed a predatory stillness that terrified even the most seasoned Wall Street veterans. He wore a midnight blue bespoke suit that radiated quiet generational wealth. He walked with the slow, measured cadence of an apex predator inspecting its territory. He was flanked by two massive security directors, but he was undeniably the most dangerous man in the room. His gaze swept over the crowd, a calculating scan that evaluated the net worth and utility of every single person standing before him. The sea of executives parted immediately. Billionaires and hedge fund managers stepped back, pressing themselves against the marble columns to clear a wide path for him. Nobody dared to speak. Nobody dared to raise a glass. They simply waited, holding their collective breath, as Desmond Sterling took his first steps into the center of the gala. From my concealed vantage point in the shadows, I watched Marcus react. The absolute terror of his recent humiliation with Elias Thorne was still completely visible on his sweating face. But desperation is a highly toxic fuel. Marcus knew his reputation was bleeding out on the ballroom floor. He knew the whispers were already spreading. He needed a lifeline. He needed the ultimate validation to save his career before the rumors of his incompetence reached the executive suite. He looked at the thick leather-bound dossier clutched in his trembling hand. It contained the printed schematics of my algorithm, the very same code he had just failed to explain. Marcus broke away from Chloe and Bradley. He ignored his sister-in-law's frantic whisper to stay put. He stepped directly into the cleared path, intercepting the chairman of the board. It was a catastrophic breach of corporate etiquette. You do not ambush Desmond Sterling. You wait to be summoned. The two security directors instantly stepped forward, raising their hands to block Marcus. But Desmond raised a single finger, halting them. He stopped walking. He looked at the sweating, frantic mid-level manager standing in his path. Desmond's expression was a mask of absolute freezing indifference. Chairman Sterling Marcus gasped, his voice painfully tight as he tried to project an aura of confidence he did not possess. I apologize for the interruption, sir, but I knew you were looking for an immediate solution to the overseas market volatility. I am Marcus. I am the Director of Data Analytics. I have spent the last 6 months personally developing a dynamic risk prediction model. I wanted you to be the very first to see the physical architecture. Marcus bowed his head slightly, a subservient, pathetic gesture. He thrust the heavy leather-bound report forward, offering it to the billionaire like a desperate sacrifice. His hands were shaking so violently that the thick pages audibly rustled against the leather cover. The silence in the ballroom became physically oppressive. Every single executive watched this interaction. Elias Thorne stood a few yards away, his arms crossed, his face carved in stone. Bradley and Chloe watched from the sidelines, their faces completely drained of color, terrified that Marcus was about to permanently destroy their social standing by association. Desmond did not say a word. He did not smile. He did not offer a handshake or a polite greeting. He looked at the trembling leather dossier. Then he slowly, deliberately moved his piercing gaze up to Marcus's face. The chairman's eyes were cold, calculating, and entirely devoid of mercy. He looked at Marcus the way a scientist looks at a particularly uninteresting specimen under a microscope. He was analyzing the sweat on Marcus's brow, the panic in his rapid breathing, and the sheer, arrogant desperation required to pull a stunt like this in public. I watched from the dark, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. Marcus was begging for salvation from the very man who demanded absolute perfection. He thought handing over a printed report would instantly erase his catastrophic failure from 5 minutes ago. He thought the shiny leather cover would hide the fact that he was a total fraud. Desmond finally moved. He reached out with one hand and took the dossier from Marcus. He did not open it. He did not look at the title page. He simply held the heavy document at his side. The gesture was so profoundly dismissive that it hit harder than a physical strike. He was accepting the paperwork not as a brilliant financial revelation, but as an annoying piece of trash handed to him by a subordinate who did not know his place. "You are the director of data analytics," Desmond said, his voice deep, smooth, and terrifyingly quiet. The sound carried effortlessly across the silent room. "Yes, sir," Marcus choked out, attempting a proud smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. "I oversaw the entire infrastructure. I built the non-linear feedback loops to ensure holistic asset shielding. It is a revolutionary approach to market preservation." He was regurgitating the exact same meaningless buzzwords he had used earlier. He had learned absolutely nothing from his humiliation with Elias. He was doubling down on his own ignorance, praying the chairman would not ask him a technical question. Desmond stared at him for 3 agonizing seconds. The billionaire did not ask about the feedback loops. He did not ask about the predictive models. He simply tightened his grip on the leather folder. A man who truly builds something revolutionary does not need to ambush his superiors in a hallway to prove his worth. Desmond said, his tone dropping the temperature in the room by 10 degrees. The work always announces itself. Only a man terrified of his own shadow feels the need to shout this loudly. The words were a brutal, surgical strike. They completely bypassed the corporate jargon and cut straight to the rotten core of Marcus's character. Desmond Sterling did not even need to read the code to know that Marcus was incompetent. He could smell the fear. He could see the fraud dripping off him. Marcus physically recoiled as if he had been slapped. His jaw dropped open, but no sound came out. The blood rushed to his face, turning his cheeks a mottled, embarrassing red. He looked wildly around the room, seeking any form of support, but the executives averted their eyes. Bradley and Chloe actively took a step backward, physically distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout of Marcus's destroyed reputation. "I will review this submission." Desmond continued, his voice entirely devoid of emotion. "But I highly suggest you return to your table, Director. You are currently blocking my path." It was the ultimate dismissal. Marcus had wagered his entire career, his dignity, and his family's reputation on this single interaction. He had expected to be hailed as a conquering hero. Instead, he was being ordered to get out of the way like a discarded piece of furniture. Marcus swallowed hard, his entire body trembling. "Yes, sir," he whispered, his voice entirely broken. "My apologies, Chairman Sterling." Marcus stepped aside, lowering his head in absolute crushing defeat. The golden boy, the arrogant executive who had shoved me into a corner and insulted my South Atlanta upbringing, had just been publicly humiliated by the most powerful man in the state. His grandmaster plan had completely imploded. Desmond did not spare Marcus another glance. He stepped forward, clutching my stolen algorithm in his hand, and continued his slow, powerful march through the ballroom. The crowd parted for him once again, the murmurs of shock and second-hand embarrassment rippling through the executives as they watched Marcus drag himself back toward his horrified family. From the safety of the shadows, I allowed myself a slow, deep breath. The first phase of the execution was complete. Marcus had been stripped of his armor. His fake confidence was destroyed. He had successfully delivered the bait directly into the hands of the chairman. But the night was far from over. Desmond Sterling was holding a dossier that had my intellectual fingerprint woven into its very core. He was holding a document that contained a secret code I had planted specifically for him. Marcus thought the worst was behind him. He thought his public rejection was the bottom of the barrel. He had no idea that the chairman was about to open that folder. He had no idea that the billionaire was about to recognize a mathematical signature that had been haunting him for 18 years. And as I watched Desmond Sterling stride toward the center of the grand hall, I knew the real explosion was only seconds away. I gripped the flash drive in my pocket, stepping just a fraction of an inch closer to the light. It was almost time to step out of the dark. Desmond Sterling did not walk back to the VIP tables. He stopped dead in the exact center of the grand ballroom, directly beneath the massive crystal chandelier. The silence in the room had shifted from shocked amusement at Marcus's expense to a suffocating, palpable anticipation. Every wealthy investor and senior partner held their breath, waiting to see what the chairman would do with the stolen report in his hands. I watched from the shadows, my spine perfectly straight against the cold marble pillar. Desmond slowly lifted his right hand and flipped open the heavy leather cover of the dossier. He did not bother reading the executive summary. He completely ignored the glossy title page that Marcus had so arrogantly stamped with his own name in bold gold lettering. Desmond was a man who had built a financial empire from the ground up during the harshest economic downturns in American history. He did not care about marketing pitches or corporate formatting. He cared about the raw underlying math. He flipped past the charts and graphs, slicing straight to the technical appendix at the very back of the binder. He stared down at the dense pages of raw code and mathematical proofs. For 10 agonizing seconds, he did not move. He stood as still as a statue. Then the camera would capture the microscopic tremor in his fingers. The terrifying stoic billionaire who had just dismissed Marcus with absolute freezing indifference suddenly dropped his impenetrable mask. His eyes widened. He brought the pages closer to his face, tracing a specific block of printed code with his index finger. He was looking directly at the Bayesian smoothing algorithm. He was reading the precise, unique sequence of the nonlinear feedback loop I had written at 3 in the morning on my kitchen island. More importantly, he was seeing the hidden structural architecture that no one else in the world knew how to build. He recognized the mathematical fingerprint. It was a highly specific recursive sequence that prioritized asset preservation over aggressive yield during black swan events. It was a digital signature that had not been seen in the global financial sector since the devastating market crash of 2008. Desmond snapped the leather dossier shut with a sharp, violent crack that echoed like a gunshot across the silent ballroom. He snapped his head up. The executives surrounding him instinctively took a half-step backward, bracing themselves for an explosion of anger. Marcus, who was still lingering near the edge of the crowd with Bradley and Chloe, visibly flinched, his face completely drained of blood. Marcus assumed the chairman had found the fatal error on line 400. Marcus assumed Desmond was about to publicly execute him right there on the ballroom floor to make an example of his incompetence. But Desmond did not look at Marcus. He did not spare a single glance for the trembling mid-level manager or his pretentious old money brother-in-law. He completely ignored the frantic, sycophantic faces of the board members waiting for his command. His dark, piercing eyes swept across the brightly lit center of the room, dismissing the billionaires, the vice presidents, and the glittering socialites as if they were nothing more than empty statues. He was searching. He was actively hunting for the architect. His gaze cut violently through the harsh glare of the chandeliers, bypassing the main bar and the grand piano. His eyes swept over the crowded tables, ignoring the desperate attempts of his peers to catch his attention. And then his gaze locked onto the absolute darkest corner of the venue. His eyes locked onto me. I did not flinch. I did not avert my gaze or attempt to blend further into the heavy velvet drapes. I stood my ground in my discount navy blue dress, holding my glass of ice water. I stared right back at the most powerful man in Atlanta with a calm, chilling certainty. Desmond exhaled a sharp, jagged breath. He completely abandoned his security detail. He stepped forward, moving with a sudden, desperate urgency that sent a shockwave of confusion through the entire gala. The camera would drop to a low tracking angle following his heavy polished shoes as he strode directly across the marble floor. The sea of elites scrambled to part for him. He was not walking with the slow, measured cadence of a corporate king anymore. He was moving like a man who had just found water in a desert after almost 2 decades of thirst. The intense, singular focus of his approach completely shifted the gravity of the room. Marcus, seeing the chairman storming in his general direction, panicked. He thought Desmond was coming to fire him to his face in front of his arrogant family. Marcus practically shoved Chloe out of the way and threw himself forward, bowing his head in a pathetic display of submission. "Mr. Chairman," Marcus stammered, holding his hands up defensively. "I can explain the code. I can fix the data ingestion parameters right now. Please just give me one opportunity to correct the interface. I promise you the core logic is sound." Desmond did not even break his stride. He did not acknowledge Marcus's existence. He walked right past his groveling, sweating employee as if Marcus were completely invisible. He brushed past Bradley, whose jaw had dropped open in sheer bewilderment. He walked straight past the boundaries of the brightly lit networking circle and stepped directly into the cold, dim shadows of my corner. The entire ballroom turned to watch. Hundreds of the wealthiest people in the state craned their necks, completely baffled by the sight of the legendary billionaire abandoning the spotlight to approach a silent, unknown woman hiding in the dark. The very same woman who had been ordered to stand there like a disobedient servant. Desmond stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me. Up close, I could see the rapid pulse beating at the base of his throat. I could see the raw, overwhelming emotion cracking through his usually terrifying demeanor. The heavy leather dossier hung forgotten at his side. The music remained dead. The crowd remained frozen. The trap had not just sprung, it had completely obliterated the entire playing field. I held my ground, my thumb pressing firmly against the flash drive in my pocket, waiting for the Titan of Wall Street to speak. "The Fibonacci sequence engraved on the face of the watch you are wearing," Desmond said. His voice was a harsh whisper that somehow carried through the absolute silence of the ballroom. His hand reached out, hovering just an inch from my wrist, treating the cheap silver band like it was a priceless artifact. The asymmetrical gear ratio. A custom piece ordered from a private Swiss horologist 18 years ago, shipped to a blind post office box in South Atlanta. "I have been looking for you for 18 years, and cipher." I slowly lowered my glass of ice water and set it on the polished edge of the marble bar behind me. The ice clinked softly, the only sound in the dead quiet room. I let my hand drop to my side, exposing the full face of the watch to the bright light of the chandeliers above. "You told me the gears would stop turning when the market stabilized," I replied, my voice completely steady, echoing the exact phrasing from an encrypted chat log written nearly 2 decades ago. "But the market is never truly stable, Mr. Sterling. The variables just change." Desmond closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. A heavy, shuddering breath escaped his chest. When he opened his eyes again, the ruthless, terrifying Titan of Wall Street was entirely gone. In his place stood a man looking at a miracle he had stopped believing in. "It is really you," Desmond breathed out, his voice cracking with a profound, overwhelming reverence. "You were just a ghost in the machine, a teenage kid pulling strings from a public library computer. My private investigators spent millions tracking digital footprints, chasing IP addresses across the globe, and they found absolutely nothing. You vanished the moment the 2008 crash ended." "I did not vanish," I said quietly, holding his intense gaze. "I just grew up. I went to school. I learned how to build systems in the real world instead of just patching them in the dark." The ballroom remained paralyzed. Hundreds of the wealthiest executives, investors, and socialites in the city stood frozen like statues. They were witnessing a moment of absolute financial history, even if they did not fully comprehend the magnitude of it yet. But they understood the power dynamic. They saw the legendary Desmond Sterling bowing his head in sheer respect to a woman standing in a discount dress in the darkest corner of the room. Marcus finally broke the silence. He could not stand it. His fragile ego could not process the reality unfolding in front of him. He pushed his way past the inner circle of executives, his face a mask of frantic, sweating confusion. Mr. Chairman Marcus interrupted, his voice shrill and desperate as he stepped toward us. Sir, there must be some kind of misunderstanding. This is Nia. She is my wife. She is just a junior data analyst. She does not know anything about your private investments or your custom watches. Desmond turned his head slowly. The look he gave Marcus was so intensely lethal that it physically halted my husband in his tracks. Your wife, Desmond, repeated the words, sounding like poison in his mouth. He looked back at me, the pieces of the puzzle violently snapping together in his brilliant mind. He looked at the heavy leather dossier still clutched in his left hand, the report Marcus had claimed as his own masterpiece. Then he looked at the red error screen still glaring from the center of the ballroom. You claimed you wrote this algorithm, Marcus Desmond said, his tone dropping to a dangerous freezing low. You stood in front of my executive board and swore that you engineered the non-linear feedback loops. I did. Marcus lied blindly, unable to stop digging his own grave. I built the entire architecture from scratch. I supervised every single line of code. Desmond let out a sharp, humorless laugh that echoed off the high ceiling. It was a terrifying sound. If you wrote this code, Desmond challenged, holding the dossier up like a weapon, then you should know exactly why it just failed a basic stress test. But you do not. Because you did not write a single functioning equation in this entire binding. Desmond stepped away from me, closing the distance between himself and Marcus. The billionaire towered over my husband, radiating a furious, destructive energy. 18 years ago, a brilliant anonymous hacker saved my entire corporate empire from absolute ruin during the subprime mortgage crisis. Desmond projected his voice so every single person in the Ritz Carlton could hear him clearly. She built a custom firewall using a highly specific mathematical sequence to protect our domestic bonds. I offered her millions. She refused. I offered her a seat on my board. She vanished. The only thing she ever accepted from me was a custom watch sent to a blind Dropbox. Desmond threw the leather dossier directly onto the polished floor at Marcus's feet. The heavy binder hit the marble with a loud smack, scattering the printed pages of my stolen work. When I reviewed the preliminary data packet you submitted yesterday, Marcus, I immediately recognized the core logic. Desmond continued, his voice echoing with absolute authority. The Bayesian smoothing sequence, the exact unique signature of the genius who saved my life. I came here tonight expecting to finally meet my savior. Instead, I was ambushed by a pathetic, sweating fraud, trying to take credit for a masterpiece he cannot even comprehend. Marcus shrank backward, shaking his head frantically. No, sir, please. You have to believe me. Nia is just a low-level employee. She cleans spreadsheets. She does not have the pedigree to write something like this. Pedigree. Desmond spat the word out with pure disgust. You think pedigree writes code? You think a country club membership builds neural networks? You arrogant, delusional fool? Desmond turned back to me, the anger completely vanishing from his face, as he offered me a deep, respectful bow. It was a gesture that entirely shattered the social hierarchy of the room. The billionaire was yielding to the woman from South Atlanta. Bradley and Chloe stood frozen near the piano, their mouths hanging wide open. The arrogant smirks they had worn all evening had been completely eradicated. They were watching the woman they had treated like a servant receive the ultimate validation from the king of their universe. The reality was crashing down on them with the weight of a freight train. The cheap dress did not matter. The background did not matter. True, undeniable brilliance had just effortlessly overpowered their generational wealth. I stepped forward, leaving the dark corner behind. I walked directly into the bright light of the chandelier, my head held high. I stopped next to Desmond, looking down at my husband, who was currently trembling in a pool of his own humiliation. I warned you, Marcus, I said softly, my voice carrying crystal clear through the silent ballroom. I told you about the static variable on line 400. I told you the simulation would trigger an infinite loop if you tampered with the core architecture. But you told me I was just a subordinate executing tasks. You told me the architect gets the credit, not the worker. I smiled, the cold, calculated expression finally breaking through my neutral facade. Well, Marcus, I continued, savoring the absolute terror in his eyes. The true architect is finally stepping out of the shadows, and it looks like your entire building is coming down. Desmond Sterling did not let Marcus speak. He stepped into the center of the panicked circle, his powerful presence completely dominating the grand hall. He opened the leather dossier once more, holding a single sheet of the mathematical proof up to the light of the crystal chandeliers. Look at this architecture, Desmond ordered, his voice echoing off the high ceilings like thunder. Every single executive in this room knows what happened to Wall Street in September of 2008. Lehman Brothers collapsed. The global credit markets completely froze. Sterling Holdings was less than 24 hours away from absolute bankruptcy. We had hundreds of millions of dollars exposed to toxic subprime derivatives, and our internal risk models were entirely useless. We were drowning, and the entire financial district was watching us sink. He paused, his sharp gaze cutting through the crowd, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in its wake. And then, right at the absolute darkest hour, an encrypted file bypassed our corporate mainframes. Desmond continued, his tone rich with a deep historical gravity. Our IT security directors panicked, thinking it was a massive cyber attack from a foreign adversary. But it was not a threat. It was a mathematical miracle. It was a completely unprecedented predictive algorithm that accurately mapped the nonlinear volatility of the collapsing market. It laid out an ironclad, dynamic asset reallocation strategy that shielded our core capital from the wreckage. It did not just save my company, it saved the retirement funds of thousands of families who trusted us. It was the single most brilliant piece of financial engineering I had ever seen in my entire career. Desmond lowered the paper, his eyes locking onto Marcus, who was currently trembling so hard his knees were visibly shaking. The author of that code did not ask for a single dollar of compensation, Desmond said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, chilling whisper. The file was signed with a simple, unique cryptographic tag. N cipher. I spent millions hiring the best cyber forensic teams in the country to find the genius behind that keyboard. We traced the encrypted signal back to its source, expecting to find a secret quantitative trading laboratory in Zurich or a highly funded research tank in Silicon Valley. But the signal did not come from an elite institution. It came from a single outdated dial-up computer workstation sitting in the back corner of a public library in South Atlanta. A collective gasp rippled through the audience of wealthy executives. Beatrice clutched her pearl necklace, her mouth opening in sheer, unadulterated shock. Chloe took a frantic step backward, her hand gripping Bradley's arm so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Bradley stood frozen, his arrogant expression completely wiped out, replaced by a look of dawning horror as the structural logic of the revelation began to crush his elitist illusions. Desmond Tobacco, a slow, deliberate step toward Marcus, his boots clicking heavily against the marble floor. My security team monitored that public library for 3 days, Desmond said, his voice booming through the grand hall once again. And do you know what they found, Marcus? They did not find a veteran Wall Street trader. They did not find a corporate spy with an Ivy League pedigree. They found a 17-year-old girl. A black girl who had lost her parents in a tragic accident, a child surviving day by day in the drafty rooms of the state foster care system. She was a kid who could not even afford high school lunches, but she spent her afternoons devouring advanced university mathematics textbooks that the librarians sneaked in for her. She wrote the algorithm that saved my entire billionaire empire on a broken public keyboard while the rest of the world ignored her existence. The silence in the Ritz Carlton ballroom became entirely deafening. Marcus looked like he had been struck by lightning. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a wild, chaotic terror. He had spent our entire marriage trying to convince me that I was a heavy liability, an uneducated girl from the slums who needed his family name to be relevant. He had proudly stood in his study just 2 days ago and told me that a girl from South Atlanta could never understand high-level corporate finance. And now, the absolute ruler of his professional universe was announcing to the entire city that the girl from South Atlanta was the sole reason his prestigious company even existed today. The supreme irony of his theft was completely laid bare before the elite of Atlanta. Marcus had arrogantly ganked my credentials from the company server, believing he was stealing a routine project from a low-level subordinate. He thought he was cashing in on a simple work assignment to secure his vice president promotion. He had absolutely no idea that he had stolen a piece of legendary financial history. He had walked into the chairman's office and handed Desmond Sterling the exact, unmistakable signature of the phantom genius who had been haunting the billionaire's thoughts for 18 long years. He had literally walked himself right into his own execution. "Look at your family," Marcus Desmond said, his tone dripping with an absolute freezing contempt as he gestured toward the trembling figures of Beatrice, Chloe, and Bradley. "You and your relatives have spent the entire evening whispering in this dark corner, treating this extraordinary woman like an unwelcome servant. Your sister Chloe ordered her to fetch drinks. Your brother-in-law Bradley mocked her public education and her zip code, claiming she lacked the pedigree to sit at your table. You closed your fist around her arm and told her not to embarrass your pathetic hollow image." Desmond stepped directly between Marcus and me, turning his back completely on my husband to face the surrounding board members. "Let me make one thing absolutely clear to everyone standing in this room tonight," Desmond announced, his deep baritone carrying an undeniable absolute authority across the grand hall. "Marcus did not build this algorithm. Marcus does not possess the capacity to understand this algorithm. He is an insignificant, arrogant thief who attempted to steal the intellectual property of a woman who operates on a level of genius he will never achieve in 100 lifetimes. This company does not belong to the executives with the loudest voices or the most expensive tailored suits. It belongs to the minds that can build pillars out of nothing. And Nia is the strongest pillar we have ever had." I stood firmly in the light of the crystal chandelier, letting the absolute weight of his words wash over me. The old wounds, the memories of shivering in that public library, the pain of being discarded by the foster care system, and the years of enduring the toxic condescension of Marcus's family, all dissolved into a profound, icy clarity. I did not need to scream. I did not need to shout. The truth had just effortlessly leveled the entire playing field, and the family that had tried so hard to make me invisible was now completely suffocated by the heavy, crushing gravity of their own profound ignorance. Marcus shook his head frantically. The veins in his neck pulsed with wild, unadulterated terror. He broke the invisible boundary of respect, lunging forward with his hands outstretched, desperate to rewrite the reality Desmond Sterling had just laid bare before the entire executive board. "Mr. Chairman, please, you have to listen to me," Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic whine. "This is insane. She is just my wife. She is a lowly data analyst. She cleans spreadsheets. She does not even have executive clearance. You are being manipulated." Desmond did not blink. The billionaire raised his right hand, gripping the thick, heavy leather dossier that Marcus had so proudly presented earlier. With a sudden, violent motion, Desmond threw the entire binder directly into Marcus's chest. "Your wife," Desmond roared, his voice shaking the crystal chandeliers above. "A lowly analyst. Then explain to me, Marcus, how this exact printed report contains a highly classified cryptographic Easter egg encrypted under the name N cipher that I personally installed in the core system 18 years ago. You are a thief." The heavy binder struck Marcus dead center, knocking the breath out of his lungs with a loud, hollow thud. Marcus stumbled backward, gasping for air, as the binder hit the marble floor, bursting open. Hundreds of pages of complex algorithms, charts, and mathematical proofs scattered across the ground like dead leaves. Marcus froze, his hands hovering over his chest where the binder had struck him. An Easter egg, he choked out, completely bewildered. Desmond stepped forward, his polished shoes stepping right on top of the scattered pages. 18 years ago, after N Cipher saved my company, I personally instructed my top cybersecurity engineers to bury a dormant ghost protocol deep inside the Sterling Holdings core mainframe. It was a digital tripwire designed specifically to recognize her unique coding syntax. I knew that if she ever touched our systems again, the mainframe would identify her distinct mathematical rhythm. The system was programmed to automatically stamp a hidden encrypted watermark onto any data output she generated. The crowd of wealthy executives murmured in collective shock. Desmond pointed a rigid, furious finger at Marcus. When you logged into the system this morning to print this report, you used your own executive credentials. Desmond explained, his tone laced with absolute venom. But the core mainframe bypassed your security clearance entirely. The system scanned the raw logic of the algorithm you were stealing. It instantly recognized the architect. It triggered the dormant protocol I buried 18 years ago, and it stamped the name N cipher in hexadecimal code across the footer of every single page of your final output. You did not just bring me stolen property, Marcus. You brought me the undeniable cryptographic proof of your own crime. The word thief echoed through the silent ballroom. It was the ultimate inescapable death sentence in the financial district. Marcus looked down at the scattered papers around his expensive shoes. He was hyperventilating, his eyes darting wildly as his brain desperately tried to process the catastrophic trap he had walked into. He had been so incredibly eager to steal my work that he never bothered to inspect the underlying metadata. He had carried his own digital conviction right into the chairman's hands. No, that is a mistake, Marcus stammered, his polished facade entirely stripped away, revealing the cowardly hollow shell underneath. We collaborated. Yes, we collaborated on the project. She helped me with some of the basic coding, but the vision was mine. I directed the workflow. I am the project manager. I did not let him finish the lie. I stepped forward, closing the distance between the shadows and the center of the room. The executives parted from me immediately, treating me with a newfound profound reverence. You did not collaborate with me, Marcus, I said, my voice cutting through his pathetic excuses with razor-sharp precision. You waited until I fell asleep, logged into my secure workstation, and copied the entire directory to your personal drive. You then deliberately deleted my administrative access to ensure I could not alter the file before your presentation today. I stopped right beside Desmond, looking down at my husband. But you made one fatal mistake, I continued, savoring the absolute terror in his eyes. You tried to format the code to make it look like your own. You tampered with the risk-weighting variables. You changed the data ingestion parameters to a static metric on line 400. I watched you do it. I explicitly warned you that a static variable would create an infinite loop during a live stress test. Marcus stared at me, his jaw trembling. He finally realized the magnitude of my silence in his study 48 hours ago. You knew, Marcus whispered, the realization crushing the last remnants of his sanity. You knew the presentation would fail. I knew you were too arrogant to listen to a woman from South Atlanta, I replied coldly. I knew your desperate need for validation would override basic technical caution. I did not sabotage your presentation, Marcus. I simply stepped out of your way and let your own profound incompetence do the work for me. Elias Thorne, the legendary quantitative analyst who had interrogated Marcus earlier, stepped forward from the crowd. He looked at the scattered pages on the floor, then looked at me. The Bayesian smoothing algorithm, Elias said, his voice filled with genuine awe. You bypassed the regional false positives by using a self-correcting heuristic boundary. It is brilliant. It is the most elegant piece of risk mitigation I have ever seen. Thank you, Mr. Thorne, I replied with a polite professional nod. It took me 3 days to map the logic. It took my husband 3 seconds to steal it. Elias turned his glare toward Marcus, shaking his head in absolute disgust. You do not belong in this building, Elias stated flatly. You do not belong in this industry. The finality of Elias's statement was the ultimate nail in the coffin. The entire executive board was silently nodding in agreement. Marcus was entirely excommunicated from the elite circles he worshipped. He would never secure a job in the financial sector again. His name would be blacklisted across every firm in the country. I shifted my gaze to the sidelines where Bradley and Chloe were currently experiencing their own personal apocalypse. Chloe's face was completely ashen. She was gripping her expensive diamond necklace as if she were trying to ground herself in a reality that was rapidly dissolving. Bradley looked physically ill. The old money heir had just publicly endorsed a massive corporate fraud in front of the most powerful billionaires in the state. Bradley had staked his family's reputation on Marcus's stolen brilliance. Now Bradley looked at Marcus like he was a contagious disease. "Bradley!" I called out, my voice slicing through the heavy tension in the room. Bradley stiffened, his eyes darting toward me in sheer panic. He did not want to be addressed. He wanted to blend into the wallpaper and disappear. "Earlier tonight, you told me to try not to spill anything on the guests while I fetched your drinks," I reminded him, repeating his cruel insult word for word. "You said you did not want anyone important thinking Marcus married the help." I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. "It seems you had the roles reversed, Bradley. Marcus is not the architect of this family's success. He is just the thief who stole the blueprints, and you are the fool who proudly co-signed the robbery." Bradley opened his mouth, but no defense came out. There was no defense. He was completely trapped in the humiliating fallout of his own elitist arrogance. Chloe burst into sudden, frantic tears, covering her face with her hands as the sheer weight of the public disgrace finally broke her. They had spent their entire lives looking down on people like me, convinced that their wealth made them superior. Tonight, their hollow, superficial world had been effortlessly dismantled by the very intellect they had mocked. Desmond Sterling turned back to Marcus, his expression hardening into a mask of pure executive execution. "Security." Desmond barked, his voice echoing with absolute finality. The two massive security directors immediately stepped forward from the edge of the room. "Escort this man out of my hotel," Desmond ordered, not even looking at Marcus anymore. "Confiscate his corporate credentials, his company phone, and his access keys. He is permanently terminated from Sterling Holdings, effective immediately." Marcus let out a ragged, desperate sob. The security guards grabbed him roughly by the arms, hauling him up from the floor. He kicked and struggled, his expensive tuxedo twisting awkwardly around his frame. "Naya, please," Marcus begged, tears streaming down his flushed, sweating face. "Please tell them. We are a team. We are a family. You cannot let them do this to me. I am your husband." I stood perfectly still, watching the guards drag the man who had tormented me toward the grand exit. "You told me my job was to support your career, Marcus," I said softly, delivering the final fatal blow. "Consider this my ultimate contribution. I am finally letting you take full responsibility for your own actions." The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind Marcus, sealing his fate. The echoes of his desperate pleas faded into the sprawling corridors of the Ritz Carlton, leaving behind a thick, suffocating silence in the grand ballroom. Beatrice finally snapped out of her paralyzed state. The matriarch of the family, a woman who had spent her entire life carefully curating an illusion of untouchable prestige, could not comprehend that her golden child had just been publicly executed. She operated on decades of unchecked delusion, truly believing her sheer force of will could rewrite reality. She lunged forward, her expensive heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "Mr. Sterling, this is an absolute outrage," Beatrice demanded, her voice shrill, as she tried to summon an authority she did not actually possess. "You cannot possibly treat my son this way. Our family has been a pillar of the Atlanta financial community for years. Marcus is a visionary. This woman," she pointed a violently shaking finger directly at me, "is just a bitter, jealous girl from the slums who orchestrated this entire theatrical stunt to ruin his reputation. She manipulated your systems to frame him." Bradley, recovering from his own initial shock, puffed out his chest and stepped up beside his mother-in-law. He adjusted his suit jacket, falling back on the only defense mechanism he had ever known, his generational wealth. Chloe clung to his elbow, trying to look appropriately outraged rather than utterly terrified. Bradley stepped toward the chairman, forcing a tight, patronizing smile. He attempted to use a tone of familiar old money solidarity, demonstrating the sheer breathtaking audacity to use the billionaire's first name. "Desmond, let us be reasonable here," Bradley said, spreading his hands in a gesture of false diplomacy. "My family's holding company has significant ties to your firm. We move in the same circles. You know how these things go." Disgruntled subordinates often try to sabotage their superiors when they feel inadequate. "My brother-in-law is a good man from a good family." You are making a catastrophic mistake by listening to a nobody from South Atlanta over a family with actual documented legacy. Desmond Sterling did not argue. He did not yell. He did not engage in a debate with a man who had never worked a hard day in his life. The self-made billionaire simply turned his head and looked at Bradley with a gaze so intensely vacant it was worse than anger. He looked at Beatrice, Chloe, and Bradley as if they were a disgusting stain on the pristine ballroom floor. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, Desmond raised his right hand and flicked his wrist in a brief, dismissive wave. It was a silent, absolute command. Instantly, the atmosphere shifted. 4 massive security directors from Sterling Holdings, joined by the elite hotel security staff, descended upon the family. They moved with terrifying silent efficiency, their sheer size physically blocking the family off from the rest of the executives. 2 guards flanked Beatrice, while the other 2 closed in on Bradley and Chloe. "Ma'am, sir, it is time for you to leave," the lead security officer stated. His voice was a low, rumbling threat that brooked absolutely no negotiation. He stepped directly into Bradley's personal space, forcing the arrogant heir to physically stumble backward. Bradley's face contorted in pure, unadulterated shock. In his entire 32 years of life, navigating exclusive country clubs, private yacht parties, and VIP lounges, he had never once been told no. He had never been denied entry anywhere. He had certainly never been physically expelled from a room. The concept of being thrown out was completely foreign to his genetic makeup. The reality that his whiteness and his trust fund could not shield him from the consequences of his actions in this room was actively breaking his brain. "Take your hands off me," Bradley shouted, his voice cracking loudly as a security guard firmly grasped his elbow. "Do you have any idea who I am? My father owns the largest shipping conglomerate on the eastern seaboard. I will have your job for this. I will sue this hotel into the ground. Desmond, you cannot do this to us." Desmond did not even look at him. "I just did," the chairman replied, his back already turned to them as he addressed the rest of the silent ballroom. "And if your father's shipping conglomerate has any active contracts with Sterling Holdings, I will personally see them terminated by Monday morning. Now get these trespassers out of my sight." The guards did not hesitate. They gripped Bradley by both arms and forcefully marched him toward the exit. The arrogant, untouchable heir was reduced to a stumbling, red-faced spectacle. He tripped over his own expensive leather shoes, desperately trying to maintain his balance while being manhandled like a common criminal. He thrashed and cursed completely, stripping away his polished facade to reveal the spoiled, powerless child underneath. Chloe shrieked, sprinting after her husband, her heavy diamond necklace bouncing wildly against her chest. She was weeping openly now, the humiliation entirely breaking her carefully constructed socialite persona. She realized that every single billionaire in her imaginary social circle was watching her husband get dragged away. The social exile she feared most had just been violently realized. Beatrice was escorted right behind them. The matriarch fought against the guards, her perfectly styled hair falling out of place. Her face was twisted in a mask of sheer agony. She reached her hands out toward the executives she had tried so desperately to impress, but they turned their backs on her. They raised their glasses and looked the other way, completely severing her from their ranks. I stood in the center of the brilliant light, watching them go. Less than an hour ago, they had shoved me into a dark corner. They had ordered me to fetch their drinks. They had mocked my clothes, my upbringing, and my intellect. They truly believed their fake pedigree and old money connections made them invincible gods of this city. They believed they could steal my brilliance and use it to elevate their own pathetic lives. Now they were being literally dragged out into the cold night air, permanently exiled from the world they worshipped. They were completely stripped of their dignity, their financial security, and their social standing. The irony was sweet, absolute, and perfectly executed. I did not say a single word as the heavy doors slammed shut behind them, banishing them into the darkness they had tried to force upon me. The heavy oak doors had barely settled into their frames after banishing his arrogant family when I turned my attention back to the man who started it all. Marcus had not made it out of the building yet. Desmond Sterling's security directors had detained him at a polished marble console table near the coat check, executing the chairman's exact orders to strip him of every single piece of corporate property. Marcus was a pathetic, trembling mess. He fumbled with his expensive leather wallet, his hands shaking so violently that his platinum corporate credit cards clattered against the stone surface. He was crying actual desperate tears streaming down his face, completely ruining the carefully curated image he had spent his entire adult life trying to project. The security guards stood over him like executioners, demanding his access badges, his encrypted company phone, and his security fob. I walked slowly across the grand foyer, leaving the glittering lights of the ballroom behind me. The remaining executives lingered near the archways, completely captivated by the absolute destruction of a man who had tried to play God in their universe. They watched me with a quiet, profound reverence. I stopped on the opposite side of the marble table. Marcus looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. He looked like a cornered animal hoping for a sudden display of mercy from the very person he had spent years locking in a cage. "Nia, please." Marcus begged, his voice a hoarse, ragged whisper. "I lost my job. I lost my reputation. You proved your point to the board. Just tell them to let me go home. We can figure this out privately. We can fix this." I did not smile. I did not blink. I reached into the pocket of my navy blue dress and pulled out the small silver flash drive I had been gripping all night. I held it between my thumb and index finger, letting it catch the light of the crystal sconces above us. Then, with a sharp, definitive motion, I tossed it onto the marble table. The metal drive hit the stone with a sharp crack that echoed loudly in the quiet foyer. "We are not fixing anything, Marcus," I said, my voice dropping to a freezing, clinical tone that left absolutely no room for negotiation. Because stealing my intellectual property was just the preamble. I did not just come here tonight to expose your professional incompetence. I came here to ensure you never see the outside of a federal penitentiary. Marcus stared at the small silver drive as if it were a live grenade. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him a sickening ashen gray. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing against his tight collar. "I do not know what that is," he stammered, backing away slightly from the edge of the table. "It is your financial obituary," I replied smoothly, crossing my arms over my chest. "You spent our entire marriage treating me like an uneducated girl from South Atlanta. You genuinely believed my data entry job barely paid enough to keep the lights on. You underestimated my intelligence so profoundly that you never bothered to wonder how I actually managed my private consulting accounts. You thought you were so incredibly clever when you installed that keylogger on my home office network 3 years ago." Marcus physically recoiled. His eyes darted toward the security directors who had now stepped closer, boxing him in completely. "I found your hidden digital tracks 6 months ago." I continued, speaking clearly, so every executive lingering near the doorway could hear the absolute depths of his depravity. "I watched you quietly siphon hundreds of thousands of dollars from my personal business accounts. You routed the stolen money through a series of anonymous LLCs registered in Delaware, thinking standard corporate shielding would hide your tracks. You did it because you wanted to maintain the perfect, wealthy facade for your pretentious family. You stole my money to fund the lifestyle you could not afford on a mid-level manager's salary." I leaned forward, placing both hands flat on the marble table, closing the physical distance between us to ensure he felt the full weight of my absolute authority. "That heavy gold Rolex you gifted Bradley last month to buy his respect and secure your place in his old money circles," I said, hitting every syllable with lethal precision. "You bought it using my routing number, the luxury golf club memberships, the down payment on your mother's newly renovated kitchen, even the custom-tailored tuxedo you are wearing right now, sweating through the silk lining. Every single thread of your fake elite existence was paid for by my sweat, my brilliance, and my money." Marcus opened his mouth to deny it, but his vocal cords completely failed him. He was suffocating under the weight of his own criminal arrogance. He had been so utterly convinced of his superiority that he never once considered I was tracking every single fraudulent wire transfer he made. "You committed massive wire fraud, Marcus," I stated, my voice echoing like a judge reading a final sentence. You committed identity theft and corporate embezzlement across state lines. This flash drive does not just hold the original uncorrupted version of the algorithm you tried to steal tonight. It holds every single bank statement, every forged IP log, every false digital signature, and a completely unbroken paper trail directly linking your personal devices to my stolen funds. I paused, letting the sheer, terrifying reality of his situation crash down on his shoulders. The FBI field office in downtown Atlanta will receive a heavily encrypted, unredacted copy of this drive at exactly 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, I announced, delivering the final fatal blow. And unlike the risk prediction model you failed to understand tonight, there is absolutely no algorithm on Earth that can save you from a federal indictment. Federal prison is not a country club, Marcus. There are no networking events in a cell block. Marcus collapsed. His knees literally gave out, buckling underneath him as the sheer gravity of his impending prison sentence destroyed his nervous system. He hit the floor, grabbing the edge of the marble table to keep himself from completely sprawling on the ground. He was hyperventilating, sobbing uncontrollably, completely stripped of the arrogant, abusive monster he had been just hours ago. Desmond Sterling stepped out from the archway of the ballroom. The billionaire chairman had stood silently listening to the entire financial execution. His face was carved from granite, radiating absolute disgust, as he looked down at the pathetic man weeping on his hotel floor. Wire fraud and identity theft. Desmond rumbled, his voice cold and unforgiving. You are not just a disgrace to the financial sector, Marcus. You are a common, desperate thief. Sterling Holdings has zero tolerance for corporate criminality. Desmond turned to his lead security director. Do not just throw him out on the street. Call the Atlanta Police Department right now. Have him detained on the premises for suspected corporate embezzlement and theft. I want him in handcuffs before he leaves this lobby. Marcus let out a ragged, agonizing scream, burying his face in his hands. He knew it was entirely over. He had tried to build a kingdom on the back of a woman he despised, and she had just ruthlessly, systematically burned his entire world to ash. He was going to lose his freedom, his wealth, and his precious social status in one single devastating night. I did not look at him anymore. He was no longer a threat. He was just a pathetic, broken memory. I picked up the silver flash drive from the marble table and slipped it safely back into the pocket of my dress. I stood tall, adjusting my posture, feeling the heavy, suffocating chains of the past 5 years completely shatter and fall away. Marcus's agonizing screams faded and died completely as the heavy oak doors of the grand hall slammed shut. The space inside the Ritz Carlton instantly fell into a solemn, heavy silence. Hundreds of eyes from Atlanta's elite converged on me. They no longer held contempt or pity, but absolute astonishment and profound reverence. They were looking at a mathematical genius who had just stepped out of the shadows. Someone who had single-handedly turned the tide for a billion-dollar corporation in one night. Chairman Desmond Sterling slowly turned around, looking directly at the executive board and the crowd waiting with bated breath. He stepped up to the center podium where the screen displaying the error had just been turned off. His deep, commanding voice resonated, carrying across the ballroom through the high-end speaker system. As everyone present here has witnessed, Marcus Anderson is not merely incompetent, but a criminal who has stolen intellectual property and committed financial fraud. His termination is effective immediately. Sterling Holdings will never tolerate those who build their reputations on the sweat and intellect of others. Desmond paused for a moment, his eyes shifting from anger to a deep, profound sense of pride and emotion as he looked toward me. For the past 18 years, the seat of Chief Technology Officer for our corporation has remained vacant, he declared boldly. Many of you have wondered why I rejected hundreds of resumes from renowned professors or top experts from Silicon Valley. The reason is simple. That seat was always reserved for the person who saved Sterling Holdings in 2008. That person does not need a prestigious Ivy League degree or an aristocratic background to prove her worth. Her undeniable genius speaks for itself. Today I am honored to officially appoint Nia to the position of Chief Technology Officer of Sterling Holdings. She will lead our entire algorithmic architecture and technological strategy starting today. The ballroom instantly erupted into thunderous applause. Murmurs of admiration echoed everywhere. The senior executives and seasoned investors who had previously ignored me at the bar were now scrambling to step forward, bowing and offering their congratulations with the utmost reverence. Elias Thorne approached, gently raising his wineglass toward me with a deeply satisfied smile of approval. I smiled and nodded in return, maintaining the calm and pride of someone who knows her true worth. The camera transitions smoothly, taking us away from the noisy ballroom and back to the present day. Warm golden light floods the luxurious penthouse living room in downtown Atlanta. The space is exquisitely decorated with high-end leather furniture and modern artwork reflecting absolute independence and success. I sit casually with my legs crossed on the soft black leather sofa. The silver watch engraved with the Fibonacci sequence sparkles under the lights, its gears still moving rhythmically and precisely, exactly how I control my own life. I gently raise a glass of red wine, letting the liquid swirl and reflect the soft ambient lighting of the room. The camera begins a long, slow dolly out, widening the angle to capture the sheer luxury and tranquility of the surrounding space. I look directly into the lens, my eyes razor sharp, and holding a sense of absolute freedom. He once gripped my arm tightly at the entrance of the gala and told me not to embarrass him. I say, my tone completely calm, laced with a gentle mockery. He thought my background from the slums of South Atlanta was a stain that needed to be hidden. He and his family believed that designer clothes, corporate credit cards, and empty flattery at elite country clubs could turn them into rulers. They arrogantly stole my hard work, backed me into a dark corner, and thought I would forever bow my head, accepting my role as an invisible shadow to serve their fragile, broken egos. I take a sip of red wine, letting the sweet, astringent taste linger, then smile a powerful, commanding smile as the camera continues to pull away. But he and all those people out there were entirely wrong. They will never understand that true genius does not need a halo bestowed by others. The people they ruthlessly tossed into the shadows, the ones who had to teach themselves how to survive in the pitch black, they are the ones who understand the architecture of the system best. We are not afraid of the dark. We just stand there quietly observing, waiting for the perfect moment to step up, flip the switches ourselves, and burn their illusions entirely to ashes.